the Crosley Building up on Coleraine Avenue. And I think the first program I saw was Bill Stace and the Flying Dutchman. And gee, to be in that big, cathedral studio and that live orchestra after coming from a small educational radio station in the University of Florida in Gainesville, I guess my eyes were just as big as teacups.
Who originally contacted you to come to Cincinnati to do the Reds games?
Well, it's a bit of a story, Bob, and I think it goes back. When I started on the station down in Florida, it's a daylight-operated educational station, no commercials. It isn't often that a person can say that you've gone as far as you can go at a place. But after I became the chief announcer there was no higher place to go except to go to another station, the bigger station, a commercial station. Mm-hmm. And in the summers, I used to save money and ride buses. And I came to Cincinnati and took competitive auditions 3 times over 3 years. And that's how the people at WLW knew me. And so after Mr. Crosley got control of the Cincinnati club and decided to broadcast his games on his smaller station, he then had WLW and WSAI. Mm-hmm. They looked around and nobody on the staff did baseball. And Chet Thomas was the chief announcer at that time. And he said, well, that kid from Florida that's made a pleasing, impression. He says he does sports. So they sent me the wire, and I answered yes.
Who did you learn from, or did you learn totally by yourself? We have now, speaking of myself, only 3 or 4 years in the business, we have people like you to look up to. You were one of the pioneers of the business. How did you come across the method that you broadcast the game?
Bob, our lives are so filled with turning points and with people who are pivotal. As just an accident, I got a job as a part-time student announcer on the University of Florida radio station in March of 1930, 35 cents an hour. And the fellow who was doing sports on the station was named Jack Thompson, and he did a very good job. He was in the law school. And Jack Thompson's father, who had founded a very distinguished law firm in Miami, Thompson and Smathers. That Smathers was the father of the Senator Smathers. And Jack Thompson's father sent for Thompson and told him to come down and go to work in his law firm. And in those days, you didn't have to be a college graduate to be a lawyer. You just passed the state bar examination. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Thompson left. And WRUF had nobody that fall to do university football games. And so I said, well, I played high school football. Give me a chance. And so they let me do the first one, and that was probably the worst broadcast that was ever done. I went into the booth. I didn't even know to take pencil, paper, and in those days, too, they didn't have numbers on the football players. It was a little primitive. But they tried some other people the next couple of games, but I had learned enough painfully that first game. I started going to football practice and started going to work. And so they gave me a second opportunity because they had nobody else. And that one did better. And from that time on, I did the football. Then I began to do baseball. And while I did semi-pro baseball down there, and university baseball, and American Legion Junior baseball, they still played, 90 feet between bases. They still used the same regulation baseball, still used bats and gloves. And so when I got to jump to come up to Cincinnati, they never asked me had I ever done a professional ball game. So when I did opening day of 1934, that was the first professional ball game I not only broadcast, but I'd ever seen.
Ever seen?
Ever seen.
Well, now, were most teams in professional baseball at that time doing radio broadcasts of their games?
No, it was not the situation that, as we know it today. The 3 New York teams at that time, the Yankees, Giants, and the Brooklyn Dodgers, entered in 1934 a 5-year legal pact that they would not allow any broadcast of their games. They would not allow in Cincinnati Western Union recreation. For 5 years, nobody broadcast any of those New York teams. Also at Cincinnati in those days, we couldn't rebroadcast on Western Union doubleheader on Sundays in Pittsburgh or St. Louis. And in 1934, I don't think that MacPhail allowed more than 16 of the home games here at Cincinnati to be broadcast. So things started very simply, and broadcasting was pretty spotty except in Chicago. That's where baseball broadcasting started. A lot of stations broadcast there. And you being from Illinois, you may have heard stories about it, but that's where they used to really broadcast the ball games.
And the evolution took how long to get to not only doing home games, but away games and trunk lines and and broadcast
Well,
lines?
Bob, I think I can not take up too much of your time, and yet I believe I can answer this. Baseball did not become all-out broadcasting in the big leagues until Larry MacPhail refused to renew that anti-radio pact in New York. He had taken over the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1938, and he notified the Yankees and Giants that he was going to broadcast in 1939, which he did, and he brought me from Cincinnati to do the Brooklyn games. And by the fact that he broadcast, he forced the Giants and Yankees to broadcast. But the Giants and Yankee broadcast was a home-and-home basis. When the Giants were home, their games were broadcast. When the Yankees were home, their games were broadcast. And that's the way that went.
From the same station?
That's right. So it was
Two
home and
different
home.
teams from
That's
the
the way
same
they used to
station.
do it in Chicago. You do it with the Cubs when they would Wrigley Field, do the White Sox when they would Comiskey Park.
Oh, I see.
Right?
I see.
Well, but of course they've split it now. But MacPhail was a great believer in the continuity of home and away. He regarded his broadcast when the team was away as far more valuable than when his team was home, because it kept the team alive when they were on the road. It gave you a chance to point out when the team was coming back and the games they were going to play.
Yeah.
It was a great selling medium.
And I would imagine that the ban on local broadcast was to try to encourage as much attendance at the local ball game, and that if there was any radio broadcast, it might discourage from someone from...
Dick, when radio came in, baseball was terribly afraid that radio would hurt the gate, because people in baseball said, well, why give away something to radio that you are charging people for to come to the ballpark?
Mm-hmm.
And then the baseball people said, well, certainly if it's an uncertain day as far as the weather's concerned, people aren't going to go to the ballpark. If it looks like it might rain, they're going to stay home. And this was particularly strongest with the three New York teams.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1933, Major League Baseball, the American and the National Leagues, almost passed a complete ban of all radio broadcasting. And the only reason they didn't was that Mr. Wrigley Sr., who was then alive, who believed in the power and promotional value of baseball play-by-play on the radio, he alone turned the tide. And so baseball finally came up with one of these compromise things in which they left it to each individual ball club to do what they wanted to do after their winter meetings following the season of 33. And that's when these three New York teams decided, well, we don't want any part of it, so we'll have a 5-year ban.
Yeah.
And they kept it. Now, to finish your answer, MacPhail again comes into the picture. MacPhail came out of the Army, and with Dan Topping and Del Webb got control of the New York Yankees. And in 1946, because he believed in this continuity of home and away, he said to Horace Stoneham of the Giants, I'm not going to share the broadcast with you anymore. You go your way and good luck. I'm going to have my own broadcast. And he got Mel Allen, who had come out of the Army, and he put Allen on the road. And in 1946, the Yankees began to do all of their games live. So no matter where they played, they were done live. And then that set the pattern. 1948, the Brooklyn Dodgers went on the road.
And that's the year that you had to go on the road.
That's right. And we stayed on Wire Creations until the middle of 48, when I remember talking to Mr. Rickey, and he said, well, I guess the time has come. We've got to travel.
How did you learn to do these recreations off the Western Union? Did they really use sound effects, or were you making the sound effects of those old broadcasts that we hear so much about? Or were there the sound effects of the crack of the bat and the crowd noise? And
Well, Bob, again, you get down to the philosophy and the practice and the technique of the individual broadcasters. There were most of the fellows who did recreations tried to pretend that they were doing a live game. They dubbed in crowd effects.
Mm-hmm.
They dubbed in the sound of a bat and a ball, etc. But then they had a terrible time when the Western Union wire went out, which it did frequently. And they used to sometimes have 25 or 30 foul balls waiting for the wire to come back there. Or they'd have a dog running out on the field, and we got to call time for everybody catches the dog. They tore more lines than you could shake a stick at. It happened that, as far as I was concerned, Western Union had a standard form, they call it Paragraph 1. I think they charged $25 a game. And you could buy it if you had a pool room, or if you had a bar, or if you had a club getting together, they would sell it to you. And they had a sending operator. Western Union had an exclusive with all of the ball clubs. And they would send this, they'd have a sending operator at each ballpark. And what they sent was a bare skeleton of just the basic facts and nothing else. They would send you the batting order, they would send you the estimated attendance, they would send you the umpires, and then when the first batter came up, they would just say, Smith up. They didn't say that he was right or left-handed. And then they would send S1C, strike one call. FB, foul back, strike two. B1W, ball one wide. Hit, single right. So you in the studio, you had to remember how Smith looked. You had to remember how the opposing ball club played him. You had to remember how the opposing pitcher looked. And then, of course, you did know where the pitches went. So you were dealing accurately with what happened. Also, you had the privilege of having your operator, your receiving operator, break in on the sending operator and ask him for additional details if you needed it. When I broadcast the games from Western Union Recreation, I had the receiving operator right there with his typewriter and his dot dash sound right under the microphone. That's the only sound effect I had. I wanted the audience to know that I was doing the best job I could from a recreation. I always found out that the strongest thing you can stand on is truth, and your audience appreciated that. They always knew that I was in the studio and doing a recreation. And you broadcast a live game from your eyes, what you saw. You broadcast the recreation game from a series of mental pictures. I had a photograph of every player in the league in my mind. And I also had diagrams of the different ballparks. So as I stood there waiting pitch by pitch, I saw this game. And I was in the fortunate position, if the wire went out, all I had to say is, the wire's gone out. Then I said, we'll look at the scores of the other games, we'll recapitulate and bring you up to date. And then if the wire's still out, you say, well, it's a hot afternoon, let's play a little easy to listen to music, and as soon as the wire comes back, we'll be with you.
Interesting. When you talk about recreations,
Yeah.
in talking to Johnny Vandermeer about his double no-hit game,
Yeah.
it was discovered by our program here that the attendance at the first game was only 5,800 people. And
Well, the
second,
Boston Braves were playing here in the afternoon, and it was hot, and neither the Braves or the Reds were going any place particularly.
And you did that game?
I did that game.
And then,
I was the only one who did it, live. And I would say I'm the only one who did it because Boston at that time, the fellows who broadcast the Boston games broadcast the home games of the Red Sox and the home games of the Braves. So Boston would not have been broadcasting
I see,
that
I
game.
see. And
so
then-
I'd say I was the only one who did it.
and then 4 days later,
At Brooklyn.
did you do the recreation or the Western Union ticker tape, or well,
No,
I understand
because
that
that
it came
was-
through every 15
No,
minutes? or
Bob,
something.
this was the 5th year of that ban that the New York teams would not allow. Nobody broadcast Vandermeer's second no-hitter. I
None.
hope we can get this settled.
None. Nobody.
All through my life, I've heard people come up and say, gee, I enjoyed hearing you do Vandermeer's second no-hitter. And I finally reached the stage, I can only take so much, that I would just smile and say, thank you very much, I'm glad you did. But nobody ever broadcast.
Nobody.
Nobody ever broadcast. There was an absolute ban. There was no broadcast. And again, MacPhail comes in. This was when MacPhail turned on the lights at Brooklyn. And they had a full ballpark. I think they had some 38,000.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. There is another subject to cover here,
Yeah.
but we'll take this commercial break and be back to it. Red Barber, our guest on Sports Talk. Stay tuned. We've got lots more. The Reds falling on hard times at the hands of the San Francisco Giants. Thank God they're out of town. We don't want to see them for a long time to come. But the Montreal Expos are hot, too. They lead the National League East. Hopefully we can get to them. Moscow for us, Palmer for them tonight. Red Barber, our guest on Sports Talk. And Red, among the many things that you covered as a broadcaster in your 33 years, one of them had to be one of the most historic events in the history of Major League Baseball, and that was Branch Rickey signing Jackie Robinson to a contract. And you were the broadcaster at the time that happened. I believe it was around 1947.
That's right.
I imagine it had to be a very interesting time to be around the Brooklyn Dodgers when that happened.
Bob, I think I could say this safely. That was the hottest microphone that any sports announcer ever had to face, because passions ran so high. There was tremendous resentment and apprehension about bringing Robinson into baseball. There were many men in baseball itself that cursed Ricky for doing it, went to their graves cursing him, and they never changed. They took the money that the extra attendance brought, but they never forgave him for doing it. Robinson's life was threatened in towns. It was, I don't know of any athlete who ever had to undergo the pressures that Robinson had to undergo. He didn't have to make it just as a ball player. He had to make it in a completely emotionally charged situation. You had segregated stands in those days. Robinson couldn't stay in a hotel in Cincinnati when he first broke in. He couldn't stay with the ball club. He couldn't stay in a hotel with a ball club in St. Louis. I can't tell you how difficult it was. And I often like to think that my training from MacPhail and then from Ricky and from Judge Landis was such that I had been trained to try and be a reporter. And when Mr. Ricky told me before he even knew who Jackie Robinson was, that he had made up his mind that he was going to break the color line. He gave me a couple of years to get ready. After all, I think he was very astute. I was born in Mississippi. I grew up in Central Florida. My whole background was Southern, and I was who like anybody else, I was who my background indicated I was. And I had a very pronounced Southern voice. And I was the announcer at Brooklyn. And so, as I said, Mr. Ricky gave me time to get ready. And I got my thinking straight because, one, I had to begin saying to myself, well, now, wait a minute. Here is a Negro coming into baseball, and I'm going to have to be the announcer. The first question I had to ask myself was, what control did I have over the parents I was born to?
None.
Well, once I answered that, then I began to say, well, what control did Jackie Robinson have? And then I remembered before my first World Series, Judge Landis was the commissioner, baseball's first commissioner, and all the networks broadcast that. And he had Mutual, NBC, CBS. He had not only all the announcers, but he had the executives and this, that, and the other. And Judge Landis said, I'll try and shorten this for you because of your time, he said, I'm not going to try and tell you gentlemen who are specialists in your field how to do your work. But he said there are going to be two teams on the field this afternoon, and they are the two best teams in baseball this year. Now, when you gentlemen are broadcasting the World Series, don't you try and help them play baseball. They know how to do it better than you. And there are going to be two men, you probably won't see them, they'll stay in the dugouts, managers. For this year, they're the two best managers in baseball. Now, don't try to help them manage. They're perfectly capable. You let them manage. You just report what is going on. Just report the game. Don't play, don't manage, report. And he said there are four men on the field. You can pick them up pretty easily. They're blue serge suits. This was when they had only four men, not long before they had six. He said, they're the umpires. Now he said, certainly they don't need your help. Don't you help them umpire. You report what they rule. Now he said, by report, I mean you report everything that you see. That's your duty. You report it. Suppose a ball player should walk over and spit tobacco in my face. Don't feel sorry for the commissioner. Just report the steps the ball player took. Report the accuracy, if you can, if your eyes are that good. Report the reaction of the commissioner, if he has one. Report. Gentlemen, report, good day. And then it got through my mind that Robinson was to be no problem to me. After all, I wasn't a sociologist. I wasn't a club executive. I wasn't a player. I was a broadcast reporter. And all I had to do about Robinson was report him. And that's all I did, and it seemed to be quite satisfactory to all concerned.
End of story, and no problem in your mind. It does seem, though, that, and maybe I must include myself in this group, that sportscasters have changed a great deal from the simple reporter to people who do commentaries, opinionated people, supposed controversial people. Is that good or bad for the sport? Do you are you a judge of people who are on the air nowadays?
No, I'm not a judge, and I don't intend to be a judge, Bob. I'm in my 50th year as a broadcaster. And I had 33 years in the big leagues. And they were wonderful years. And I'm grateful that I had them, and that I had them in the places and at the times that I had them. And the fellows who are working today are working as individuals, doing the work as they see their way to do it. None of them ever interfered with me doing my work. And certainly at 72 and looking back, I am not going to say, well, this is the way you fellows ought to do it. I don't think that's my province.
There is another tag that is put on a lot of announcers nowadays, and that is that they tend to be homers. In the opinion of listeners, not necessarily true, but in the opinion of listeners, that they tend to root for the home team. How did you deal with that problem when you were working for the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Cincinnati Reds?
Well, I told you what Judge Landis told me, and that made a deep impression. I never forgot it, that my job was to report and not to be emotionally involved. Then I understood, Bob, as I think we all do if we think about it, that human beings see what they want to see. If you have a favorite team, you want to see that team win. If you have a favorite player, you want to see that player succeed. I did everything I could not to have a caring about who won or who lost. That wasn't what I was paid to do. That wasn't my province. My province was to tell people who could not see the event for themselves what happened to the ball. Because everybody listening in would have different feelings about who they wanted to see win or who they didn't. Mm-hmm. My job was to tell them the game. I've said many times, I'll repeat this very, very quickly. Tom Meany, who was then alive and was a baseball writer in New York, was late going to a ball game at Brooklyn. And he jumped in a taxi cab, and the taxi driver had the ball game on. And they came to a red light, and the driver didn't know who Meany was. But he sort of turned around, and he said, you know, the trouble with that Barber, he's too fair. And Meany told me about that. And if I were going to have a tombstone, that's what I'd want on it. That was the way I tried to broadcast.
Was too fair. Barber was too fair.
That's what he said.
And it still amazes me that you learned really on the job. There was no school for you to go to. There was no.
That's right.
There was nobody for you to turn on the radio and listen to and say, gee, that's kind of nice. You did it. You are.
Well, maybe it was a great blessing. But as I went along through the years, learning to keep statistics, learning this, learning that, there was nothing as the years went by when I began to have associate broadcasters that I couldn't do that I asked them to do, and that was a great strength.
One of those people, since you bring it up, happens to turn out to be Vin Scully, who was your protege, a guy you hired with very little experience, and I think most people will consider Vin Scully.
He's the best.
He's in a level all his own when it comes to baseball.
He's the best.
You're not biased at all, though.
Well,
but I agree
would say
with you.
He's the best. Well, let me say this. You name someone who's better. In fact, name someone who's as good. Let's start that way.
I can't do that. But he is somewhat different in his approach to baseball than a lot of other people are.
I like to think some of the working philosophy that was hammered into me rubbed off on him. He says so anyhow.
Well, he not only does baseball very well, but he paints pictures like you're doing when he's doing a golf tournament.
Yeah, and football.
And football too. I get the feeling that I'm blind, and that he is really painting a mental picture of something I am seeing, and still adding something to it. I'll never forget. It was just this year at the Memorial Tournament. Vin Scully was doing it. Jack Nicklaus was standing on the 18th tee, and Vin Scully's line was, "Isn't that an ironic picture?" Jack Nicklaus squinting against the sun, looking down the 18th fairway at the winner. How many times have we looked at Jack Nicklaus walking up the 18th fairway with the sun at his back? I thought, boy, I mean, that is so profound coming from a sportscaster doing a golf tournament. It's hard to duplicate ever, and he's just that way. Who else have you kind of steered along the right paths in broadcasting that we might know about?
Well, Scully is the only one that I might say that I particularly steered. I've had the opportunity to work with a great number of very fine people. Al Helfer, whom I worked with here in Cincinnati. And then when the Brooklyn broadcast began, my only request then was that we have Helfer. And he was with us the first 3 years. and then worked many years with Connie Desmond. Then, of course, people have said that it was a pretty good broadcasting team when Mel Allen and I worked together over at Yankee Stadium for 11 years. And while I was at the stadium, Joe Garagiola started there, and so did Phil Rizzuto, and so did Jerry Coleman. So I've been around a few of them.
Yeah, a manager, a network broadcaster. Mel Allen does Inside Baseball, which is one of my favorite programs on television.
Yeah.
Is there some reason why you don't do something like that on an occasional basis, or do you, other than for Channel 64 on TV tomorrow night? Is this a common practice?
When my wife and I bought a house in Key Biscayne, Florida, in 1965, and we bought it primarily as a winter home, because the business was changing and you no longer did live commercials. Things were put on tape, put on film, so it didn't make any difference in the off season where I lived. And then when the Yankees made the decision after 1966 that they could survive without my services, I had a home in Key Biscayne, so I went down there and stayed. So I was off the beaten track. And it wasn't too long, Bob, before I became 65. And I learned the hard way after I became 65 that they didn't want me to work, because if I worked, I'd lose Social Security, I'd lose the after pension. So, I'm a slow learner, but I'm capable of learning. So
I don't agree with you. You're not a slow learner.
Finally, I can just stay home and get along with this lovely woman I've been married to all these years, since 1931.
How many years? 1931?
Yes, we have our 50th anniversary March of next year.
Congratulations.
And, she's been wonderful.
That's difficult to do for a broadcaster who has to travel train 6 months of the year.
She's been wonderful.
She sure has. She's been alone, too. I don't imagine she minds you being home at all.
Well, at one time, I was away from home 6 months out of the year. And she raised our daughter practically. But as I say, I was out of the beaten track, and then I really couldn't get back into it. Mm-hmm. Mel Allen's been a little bit younger. Mm-hmm. Well, so now that I'm 72, I'm very happy to go back into occasional spots, but not for anything would I try and do a baseball schedule again. That's for kids.
Yeah, for kids.
Yeah.
I can tell everybody out there who remembers the look of Red Barber that he has not changed a great deal. You really do look the picture of health. And if I make 72 and I can sit up, I don't want anybody to ask me any questions, because I don't have anything to say.
Bob, I don't feel any different at 72 than I did 20 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, saw Wade Hoyt this afternoon. Wade's coming up to his 81st birthday in September. And he looks great. And he was telling them about the difference in technique, about how the batter swing today and didn't swing in his day.
Wade has always fascinated me in that he, before the program starts, whenever I had him on there, he complains about how his health is and how, I got this problem, I got that problem. And then on the program, Wade, what have you been doing? Well, I went to England, I went to Portugal, I went to Las Vegas, I was in Los Angeles, I went to Mexico, went to Hawaii. He just suffers from terminal jet lag. That's the only thing that bothers him.
Bob, years ago, when Notre Dame would go out to play Southern California every other year, the stars in Hollywood would put on a big entertainment for them Friday night. And I was out there to broadcast one of those games for CBS when I was director of sports. And Bill Robinson, Bojangles, was alive. And he just danced and danced and stopped the show. And he was inordinately proud of his dancing ability as he advanced into his 60s. So after the show, I complimented him, and it was a stock thing with him. He said, "You know how old I am?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, I'm not only 68, but," he says, "I'm old enough when I'm at a place to know when to leave." He says, "In fact, I'm old enough now to know certain places not to go into." So that's all 72 is. I'm just that old, too.
I happened to witness Ray Bolger at, I believe, 73, reliving the role of the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz at 73 years old, dancing up and down the aisles like a kid. It was absolutely amazing. Some other things I want to cover with you. This is Sports Talk on Radio 7. I got to talk to Red Barber. I'm not going to get this opportunity many times, so therefore I'm going to talk to him. We'll get to your phone call. Just hold on the line. Don't give up on us. And when we start, then the rest of you can call and talk to Red Barber. Red, you did 13 World Series in your 50 years of doing baseball and sports on sportscasting.
Do you want a full edition? I did 13 World Series locally, commercially in this country. I refused one, the 14th, which would have been the 14th.
Why?
Well, because I wanted to have the privilege of negotiating with the Gillette Safety Razor Company instead of having them say you're going on the World Series and not even know what I was going to get paid until they sent me a check afterwards.
I see.
That's quite a story in itself. And I'm more pleased with my self-respect of rejecting the 14th when they gave me an ultimatum, take it or leave it, you'll get what you got last year. After all, I've been able to negotiate with everybody else in the business.
Was it the
But not dear
14th?
Gillette.
Was it the last one that you were to have done, or was it in the middle?
1953.
1953.
Oh, after we had our little, should we say, arrangement, I was, my father told me when I was a boy not to go a place that I wasn't invited. I wouldn't have a good time. So I never went back around the World Series again. But except I did switch over, and for no fee and no negotiations, and very happily, worked on the next 10 World Series for Armed Forces Radio.
So that's a total of 23 then.
That was very, very interesting.
Of those 23
done and 1 rejected. And also, you talk about, people don't know that, you talk about this home run that Bobby Thompson hit,
Yes.
1951.
1951.
All right. I was sitting in the broadcasting booth, the Brooklyn broadcast, the Polo Grounds, and Russ Hodges is sitting in the New York Giants booth, and Ed Wilhelm of the Maxon Agency, which was the agency for the Gillette Safety Razor Company, came into my booth, just as he'd gone into Hodges' booth. And he said, Red, I'm telling both you boys that whoever team wins this afternoon goes on the World Series tomorrow with Mel Allen. So when Bobby Thompson's ball went in the left field stands, I went off the World Series and out of baseball for that year.
Amazing. How did we were talking before the program started?
Yeah.
And one of the amazing things about that home run, as you stated, it was not a real clout. There was some question as to whether or not that ball was ever going to get out of the park.
Well, it was a low fly or a high line drive going out to left field, but the Polo Grounds there was very short. The ball would have been caught in most ballparks. And I can see to this day, as I'm sitting here talking with you, Bob, that Andy Pafko, the Brooklyn left fielder, backed up to the base of the wall until the last split second, thought he had a chance to catch it. The ball just did go in. But anyhow, it went in. And Hodges' broadcast is the one that everybody remembers because he became a little hysterical. I would say this, that he forgot that he was a sports announcer and this was radio, and supposed to tell an audience that couldn't see what was happening. He just started screaming. I believe he said it 9 times, didn't he? The Giants were independent until they let him away from the booth.
Yeah, just let him away from the booth is an important point. That's about right.
Yeah.
Of the 23 you did, was that the highlight of all the World Series that you did?
Well, that wasn't the World Series.
I know, but of all the games that you did, was that one of the big highlights?
Well, that would be a big highlight for anybody. That is the most dramatic, that is the most important home run in the history of baseball. That home run not only settled a ball game, not only settled a 3-game playoff, it settled a whole year's work. It was for the pennant. It meant which of 2 teams went in the World Series the next day.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no other home run with that effect. And poor Ralph Branca, who had the ball hit against him, I mean, it shell-shocked him. Shell-shocked him. I'd say it very definitely hurt his life.
Well, of the 23 World Series that you did, which one stands out above the rest?
I would have to say, and I have checked with DiMaggio and with Henrik and with a lot of the ball players who were involved, with Lavagetta, who of course would be biased, with Bevins, who almost became a big hero, and John Friedel. I believe that the ball players feel, the baseball men feel, that the World Series of 1947 had more dramatic highlights in it, had more rough humanness in it. That was the home run. That was the World Series in which, with 2 men out in the last of the 9th inning at Brooklyn, with the Yankees leading 2-1. Bill Bevins, who hadn't given up a hit, he only needs one more batter for the first World Series no-hitter. Lavagello pinch hit, got a double off the right field wall, and not only broke up the no-hitter, but knocked in 2 base runners and won the ball game 3-2. That, I think, is the single outstanding memory, if you ask me, that I would have an exciting moment in baseball.
Yeah. Didn't that World Series also include a great catch
by John Friedel
off Joe DiMaggio?
He went to the left center field bullpen and took what would have been a home run away from DiMaggio. And it's probably the only time that DiMaggio ever publicly showed that he was discomfited, if I may use a kind word. Joe was coming into second base just sure he's got a home run. And all of a sudden he looks up and John Frito's got that little white spot in his black glove. Running back in. Well, that DiMaggio kicked dead coming into second base. You know, DiMaggio prided himself on being imperturbable.
Imperturbable.
Yeah, but he wasn't like that.
Do you see a difference in the ball players today? I'm new to broadcasting, and I'm new to the attitudes and the likes and dislikes of baseball players, and with the strike talks that you have, and with players upset with making $700,000 a year, and people holding out for millions, literally millions of dollars. The price may have changed, but was that same sort of bickering going on in baseball when you were doing the games?
When I started here in Cincinnati in 1934, the Depression was on. And ball players were fighting to hold a job. Money was very, very scarce. Not many people had it. And I read somewhere the other day, in the Sporting News I think it was, now this I think has a bearing on the situation. Dave Parker today of the Pittsburgh Pirates earns more money, this is one ball player, in 1 year than the entire National League payroll of 8 clubs in 1932.
That's amazing.
Now, doesn't that shake you? Of course it's changed. Of course it's changed. I read again in the Sporting News where the ball clubs are getting very exercised about the number of fellas who are hurt all the time. And they go on the disabled list. They're not available. And the point was made that before you had all of this big money and long-term contracts, it's the long-term contract, that fellas didn't go on the disabled list. They didn't get out of that lineup if they could help it, because they might not get back in for a while. And in those days, if you didn't get in the lineup, you didn't make any money.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean,
literally?
you only made money by playing, because you had to negotiate your contract on what you did at the end of the year.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Amazing. Let's take another commercial break, and after this, I promise you, we'll get to all these phone calls. Red Barber, our guest on Sports Talk.